At the next levels here, we can see asking for analysis and recommendations. And what you're doing as the boss is you're checking on their thinking before allowing them to decide. So you might say in this circumstance, give me your analysis, the reasons, the options, the pros, the cons, and give me your recommendation. And I'll let you know whether or not that's okay, whether or not you can go ahead with it. What you start doing, though, is moving up to trust, where you're basically allowing the person the ability to assess the situations and the options and to make the decisions and then implement once they're ready to go. So you're going to basically say, decide, let me know your decision, and then wait for my go ahead before proceeding. And so what you're doing is you're trusting them to go up to make good decisions, to work through the situation. You've trained them well enough that you trust that their analysis is going to be good. And then you're just going to cross the T's, dot the I's, make sure that they've done all the things that you need to do, and then you would trust them to implement, and you don't need to follow up with them. You can control the action by giving them a positive approach in delegating freedoms. We can decide, for example, is what you might say to them. Let me know your decision, but go ahead unless I say not to. So give me your ideas, and if you don't hear from me by 5 o'clock today, go ahead and do what you need to do. That's the kind of thing you might want to do there. Where, again, the person has more and more autonomy in the decision-making process. In these last few highest levels of delegation, we can see that there is high confidence, high trust. The person has much more strategic responsibility for doing things. You can get to a point oftentimes with someone saying, I know this has to get done. I know I'm ultimately responsible for making sure it gets done, but I don't need to follow up. I don't need to cross-check, because all I know that person is absolutely able to do the job, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. They are absolutely able to accomplish this and to take on full responsibility from beginning to end for a particular project. And you can understand, right? From the very beginning, we talked about just telling someone exactly what to do, not really giving them any choices, to really building them up to be able to know that you've trained them on the standards, you've trained them on the analysis that's expected, the standards of excellence that you want to see in the end, and then ultimately making sure that they have the ability to do that work. And so what you're doing in this circumstance is you're empowering them. You are hopefully engaging them more in the organization. We're going to talk about engagement in a few moments. You're getting them excited to take on more responsibility, more autonomy, more a greater strategic perspective on things, and ultimately giving them, the responsibility to do something from beginning to end. You're building trust, you're building confidence every step of the way. This is not something that you can immediately go to level 10 and expect your employees to be able to do that level of work. As your supervisor, you are responsible for making sure that they're ready and able to do the things that you want them to do. Engagement ties in with empowerment and delegation, because when you are empowering your workers, your goal is to ensure that they are engaged with the organization, that they're enthusiastic, and that this enthusiasm is going to result in higher performance for the employee as well as for the organization. So engagement ties very tightly with empowerment, because the more that we empower and delegate to people and that they accept it and embrace that, the more engaged they will feel with the company. And that, again, this all goes back to these intrinsic motivators. We need things like delegation and feedback and communication and autonomy and responsibility in order for people to feel enriched and empowered to do work. And once they feel enriched and empowered, that logically leads into engagement. It doesn't necessarily do it, but certainly if someone is open to being more fully engaged and happy with their job, you need to have empowerment and delegation and enrichment first before they can be engaged. So engagement is defined as employees who are involved in and enthusiastic about their work and their workplace. They like their boss. They like the people they work with. They like the work that they do. They're willing to engage in what we call organizational citizenship behaviors and altruistic behaviors. They're willing to go the extra mile to do the work the way it needs to get done. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for employees who don't do just the minimum, but do what they can to do the best job ever. And I'm not saying that we want them to stay here until 2 o'clock in the morning every night, because that's not fair. Employees need to have a balanced life, but we can expect them to do the work and to do it enthusiastically and to do it to the best of their ability. That's our goal, and not just do the bare minimum. Engagement is about doing more than the bare minimum. One of the things that you have to realize, though, and this is where you have to take a look at yourself as managers or future managers, or look to your managers and recognize that it is the manager that really has the biggest impact on whether or not an employee feels engaged with their work and their workplace. Because employees leave lousy managers. Employees don't leave organizations as much as they are most likely to leave because they have a really poor relationship with their manager and they don't feel like they can engage and be excited about their work. And this all comes from a Gallup poll that I think you should have read about in your reading for today. What impact then does engagement or poor engagement have in terms of organizational outcomes? Well, we're more likely to see high levels of turnover, and high levels of turnover cost the company lots of money. So when there are more people leaving, it costs you money to replace them, and that can be problematic for the organization. It also means we have a drain of skills, and we are constantly trying to train people to get up to speed on particular skill sets, which has a direct effect on the overall organizational performance. The organization's not going to perform well if we're constantly trying to train people brand new how to do work. You're going to get lower customer satisfaction because the spillover effect is if we have new people who don't know the job well, who aren't really engaged with the company, they're more likely to pass on their dissatisfied attitude to customers. This goes into a lot of things like emotional labor and things like that, which we won't get into for the purpose of this class, but the bottom line is, if I have to fake how much I like my job, that's going to absolutely affect the relationship that I'm trying to build with my customers. And I want to make sure that I have a customer relationship where they feel like I am responsive to their needs. And that's not going to happen if my employees who work with the customers don't feel engaged. You're going to get more absenteeism. Even if people don't leave, they might be more likely to come in late, leave early, take long lunch breaks, be sick more often, whatever that might be. You're going to see levels of micromanagement with bosses, because if people are not engaging the way they need to, bosses are going to overcompensate, be more likely to micromanage people, which can also create problems. You're also going to see poorer decisions. If people don't care, if people aren't engaged, then they're not going to feel that they have to invest as much in the decision-making process because they don't care what the outcome will be. They don't care that the outcome is the best or is optimal. They only care that the work gets done minimally. So you're going to get poor decisions and subsequently poor performance by the individual and the organizations. So in order for the company to have a good, strong culture of engagement, this really rests on the shoulders of management and what management needs to do in order to make sure that people are prepared to be delegated to, that they have all the necessary skills and resources and support that they need to be able to take on delegated authority. We want to make sure that they are then empowered to do the work well at high levels of performance. And so managers, there's a checklist of things that managers should really do. You should be engaged in good orientation or onboarding programs and training for all your employees. You cannot expect somebody to start a job and not know what's to be expected, the standards of excellence, what the company rules are, what resources are available. So you need to make sure as they're brought into the company, they're brought in and that they buy into the company and its culture and what the expectations are. And that when you are delegating to them and you want them to be more engaged, you're going to make sure that they are trained in the skills that they need to be able to do their job, not just for today, but for the future. You also need to involve employees in goal setting for themselves and for the organization. They should be able to participate in organizational goal setting, which means that the employees need to go to their boss and say, here's my ideas. When we're thinking about the goals that this organization needs to set, I have some ideas I'd like to share with you. Here are some of my ideas. Those ideas then get passed upward to senior management. And there's a lot of value in that because the people who know the job best and know what it is that you're marketing and what it is that the product or service does successfully or not so successfully are the people who are at the front line, who are working with the customers, who are doing the work every day. And so we tend to ignore them because we assume that they may not understand what it is that we want, and that's not the case. Employees are much smarter than we give them credit for. Most employees are smarter than we give them credit for. And I think it's really important that we make sure that they're engaged in that goal setting process, that they understand corporate strategy, and they understand where they fit into the corporate hierarchy, and that they have a voice in forming and framing the strategic direction of the company. We also need to make sure, as we're helping the employees set goals for themselves, that we are making sure our performance management expectations are based on really clear goals. We don't want someone to walk into a performance situation where they think they understand what they need to do, and then we tell them in the end they were completely wrong, because we didn't do the work in advance to investigate the situation, to set the standards, to make sure we had a clear understanding about what was needed to be done and why. So when we make sure that we are setting those expectations, we have to make sure that the employee is involved in that process and that they understand what those expectations are rather clearly. We also want to make sure, in order to keep employees engaged, is that we acknowledge the efforts of employees. And that doesn't mean that we have to have a party or a trophy every single time someone does something. Really, what acknowledgement means is, hey, Sam, you did a great job the other day. Thank you for your efforts. I really appreciated how hard you worked on that. That's all people really want more times than not. Now, I would be lying if I said that I didn't think people wanted money, because we all want money. We all want to have a bonus or a raise, as a way of acknowledging the work that we do. But assuming that we're being paid fairly, really what gets people excited and keeps them moving forward in an engaged way is knowing that their efforts are being acknowledged. If you ignore the efforts, no one's going to continue to work at the highest level possible. They'll do the bare minimum. Why? Because you don't seem to care. So, as the boss. So if you want them to continue at the high level that you want, you've got to reinforce the behaviors that you want by acknowledging it and reinforcing that what you see is good and that you like it, and that you want them to continue to do that. Okay. You want to also focus on development. Well, we talked about training earlier, right? But training and development are a little bit different. Training is making sure they've got the skills to do their job today. Development is about making sure they have the skills to do their job into the future. And that's really the goal here when we're talking about development. We want them to know what their strengths and weaknesses are and to be continually working to improve themselves. So we need to support them to keep them engaged, and we need to make sure they have development opportunities to keep them engaged in the hopes that they will grow with the company as need be. We want to make sure we avoid micromanaging, right? If we aren't preparing our employees to do the job right, then we are much more likely to engage in micromanagement, which is going to make people bristle, and they're not going to be willing and able to do the job because they're more worried about the pressure from you rather than giving the focus to the job the way they need to get it done. So we want to avoid micromanaging. The best way to avoid micromanaging is building a relationship of trust, knowing what people can and can't do to make sure that they're trained and they have the skills and the resources they need to do that job. Lastly, we want to make sure, as we've said throughout, communicating with your employees regularly and richly. That means talking with them face to face. That means making sure they know what we're doing, why we're doing it, giving them verbal feedback face to face, just checking in with them, even just to say, how are things going? Do you have any problems? Do you need anything else from me? These are the things that we want to be working on in terms of having regular, rich communication. All of these things together, when we talk about empowerment, delegation, and engagement, this is how we not only make good decisions ourselves, but we help our employees to be better decision makers because they're much more engaged, they're much more honest and trusted. They feel a commitment to the organization in a way that's pretty intense, and that's our goal.